Welcome to League of Lit, where we discuss books, adaptations, and anything else we wish to talk about and tie it to lit, because we can. It's never going to change the way that I do that. It's always going to sound exactly the same, except for maybe when I'm like 90.
We get in a groove. It's totally fine. And I find myself like saying it even when people like ask me questions, like people that I work with that know about the podcast ask me questions about it. I actually have to stop myself to not just give the spiel, which is our intro, because that covers it so well.
Because it's the easiest way to describe what we do.
It is. It really is. So today we are diving back into the world of Jane Austen. And because we're diving back into the world of Jane Austen, it only makes sense that our spoiler warning is what it is, which is it is a truth universally acknowledged that we are not a spoiler-free podcast.
And truly, this is another thing that if we're spoiling this for you, I'm really worried about your life.
Well, so we're talking about Emma today, and Emma was published December 23rd, 1815. So again, this has been around for over 200 years.
A really long time.
Yeah.
And Jane Austen is sadly very dead. So like, if you don't know this.
I had seen a video where it was someone who works at a bookstore was talking about different interactions that they have with guests, and someone had come in saying that they wanted to read more by Jane Austen and they wanted her latest. Something that had been released within the last 2 or 3 years. Like that's how specific the person
got. I'm sure there's a new cover of Pride and Prejudice that's been released in the last 2 to 3 years. Okay. I mean, I can tell you the last thing she published. Will that help? That's what I would do. I'd be like, it was a long time ago. But
yeah, no, it was definitely something that they were not ready for.
I just can't imagine. I don't know, because I Google authors, so
yeah.
I mean, also Jane Austen is just an author that I know really well, obviously.
So Emma is set in Hartfield, specifically in Highbury, and it's in the 19th century. Because,
long ass time ago.
But unlike, there are other locations that are mentioned throughout the novel, but nothing takes place outside of Hartfield.
Yeah, no, it's all in the same little town.
And how would you synopsisize Emma?
I have to, am I going to do it in 2 paragraphs or am I going to do it in 3 sentences is always the question when it comes to synopsisizing anything.
All the synopsises that I found when I was looking for inspiration to create one, they're all full-blown essays.
Yeah. When I was looking at them too, I was like, wow, you can say a lot. Okay. I'm going to try to do an overview of Emma.
Okay.
So Emma is about Emma Woodhouse, who is a 20-year-old woman who lives in Highbury. She believes that she is really good at making love matches. I don't like the way I said that, but here we are.
Full-blown matchmaker here.
Full-blown, thank you. She believes she is a great matchmaker, and so she takes it upon herself to match pretty much anybody with anybody. She's very, I see this person, they are single, I will match them. Because she believes, I'm just going to start doing a full-blown synopsis of the book.
That's fine.
She meets Harriet Smith, who is a poor orphan girl. I don't know if they ever actually call her an orphan girl, but
they don't call her an orphan, but no one knows
implied.
Who her parents are. So
yeah,
that's
it's sort of implied.
You get the idea that she is an orphan.
And Emma decides that she's going to matchmake Harriet with. It ends up being several people, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Instead of marrying Robert Smith, who is a well-to-do farmer and clearly perfect for Harriet.
Robert Smith?
I said Robert Smith, didn't I?
Yes, you did. It's Robert Martin.
It is Robert Martin. I have the list of the names of the people, too. I literally looked at Robert and went, yeah, we're just going to marry him and Harriet already. I can't stand myself. This sounds like the most manic synopsis of anything ever. Oh no.
You can see how well this is going, so why don't we just dive
Why
into
don't we
it a
just
little
start?
bit?
Yeah. I don't know how I can
So
come back from what just happened.
So I would say your key characters, besides Emma Woodhouse, who is our title character, is you have George Knightley, you have Mr. Woodhouse, you have Miss Taylor, Mr. Elton, Mr. Weston, Frank Churchill, Harriet Smith.
Yeah.
Those are kind of
That's like your the bulk of the people who are important.
Right. You also have the Bates and Jane Fairfax, but they sit a little bit more on the outside as far as if we're looking at like the people who directly impact Emma's life. They're just kind of like blips in the back of her brain, not full on like impacting her life.
Yeah, like Robert Smith. I hate myself. Oh man.
And so like at the very beginning of the book, we find out that Emma is 21, and we also find out that she is the youngest of two girls. Mr. Woodhouse is her father, and I would classify him as a hypochondriac.
I think that's the modern description of what Mr. Woodhouse would be. He's very much thinks everybody is sick all the time. He is always sick, and he will do anything to keep everybody from getting sick.
Like, it could be the middle of summer, and he has a fire going because he's afraid of everyone catching cold.
Which just seems counterintuitive, because then you're just going to hurt your body.
It's amazing that he has lived as long as he has.
I know. He's quite, not old, but, he's quite up there.
Yeah.
So it is amazing that as much as he just cannot do anything, that he's alive. But I guess it's because he doesn't do anything.
I guess. I don't know. George Knightley is a family friend, but also this is where I have a hard time figuring out how would you to actually like classify this besides being like a family friend, because George's brother John, it's his younger brother John, is married to Emma's older sister Isabella.
Yes.
So you have that connection.
Yeah, he often gets described as like a brother-in-law, but like technically speaking, is the brother of your brother-in-law your brother-in-law?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But it is kind of a debate anytime you deal with any sort of Emma thing. The people are like,
mm-hmm.
Is that not some form of her brother? But like, no, technically speaking, they're not related.
Right.
They're just, he's a good family friend. He lives within walking distance. Of course, walking distance is
miles,
but like back then everything
had to be within walking distance.
How many miles does it take me to walk here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you only went as far as you could walk. It was never.
Sometimes you get on a horse.
Right.
We also meet at the beginning of the novel Miss Taylor, who is marrying a widower named Mr. Weston and is leaving Hartfield, where Emma and Mr. Woodhouse live. And of course, that is the beginning of what Emma thinks is her matchmaking career, is Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston.
Because Miss Taylor was Emma's governess. And of course, as Mr. Woodhouse worries about everything, he is concerned at the fact that that Miss Taylor is getting married, because he's like, no, there's no need for change. We don't need that. But Emma always points out, it's like, but you wouldn't have her live with us forever. Like, I'm honestly too old to like have somebody like do what she was doing. At that
point, she was like more of a companion than a governess.
Yeah.
Which, like, at some point, you gotta go, like, live your life.
Exactly.
But Mr. Woodhouse is like, she's gonna be so far away, and Emma's like, they live, like, 12 miles down the road. It's not very far.
Right.
But that's just Mr. Woodhouse for you.
Mm-hmm.
And we meet Mr. Knightley at the beginning of the book in chapter 1. He pays a visit to Hartfield, having come back from London, where he saw his brother and Isabella and the children.
Yep. And we're told that George Knightley is either 37 or 38. Which
we're just not sure.
That seems to be like a common thing, because when we're told of Mr. Elton, it's also like, well, he's either 26 or 27. Which is it? Why can we not pinpoint an age?
Because they were too busy to notice when they were actually born. I don't know.
I think it goes a little bit to how Emma kind of just like perceives things. Because even though like technically it's told in third person, in a way you get the sense that it is told from Emma's perspective.
Yeah.
So, there's that relative like age ambiguity that exists, and apparently it only really exists with the men.
Yeah. Which I think has a lot to do with pretty much all of Jane Austen's books are told in third person, but very much from the perspective of a woman. So I think it's that sort of, I don't think they care.
No, and I
to
think
know exactly.
Well, and I think it also plays a little bit into Emma's level of interest in them as more than whoever they are meant to be in her life at the moment when we meet them.
Yeah.
Because at this point in time, Emma has declared she has no interest in marriage. She just wants to make matches for everybody else.
Yeah. Mr. Elton.
Why would she care about how old they are? Because, age doesn't matter. If you think about how this is, like...
So Emma decides that she's going to find a wife next for Mr. Elton, who is the village rector. Which just seems like a poor choice. And Mr. Knightley is very not here for the idea of Emma matchmaking. 10 out of 10.
No. And
hates it.
It's like, and you really get the sense, and I want to say it's worded this way at some point in the book, that George Knightley is the only one who's willing to like call Emma on her crap. Like he's going to push her. He's going to like make her a better person and hold her accountable for her actions, where nobody else that's in her life is going to do that.
No, because Emma was born into privilege and is very much sort of just given free rein by everybody around her. Especially her father, who is far more worried about what the weather is outside than whether or not Emma's doing something she shouldn't be doing.
Right.
We learn in chapter 2. This is going to be a book discussion. I can feel it.
Let's not, because I definitely don't have that detailed of notes for the book this go around.
I have like hints of what is in each chapter. Chapter 2 is mostly a recount of Mr. Weston's history. We learn that he was married to a woman named Miss Churchill. Miss Churchill? I can't say any of these people's names. I called her Miss Churchville.
Oh, I heard Hill.
Before I corrected myself. He was married to a woman named Miss Churchill. They had a son named Frank, who at this point lives with Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, Mr. Weston's brother and sister-in-law, after Mrs. Weston died. Mm-hmm. Which is so sad. Mr. Weston's story...
I don't even think we get a clear idea of what exactly happened to her.
I think it just says that she died.
Something like that.
That's it.
But it's not like, oh, she got sick and all this. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It's just then because of circumstances, it was better for Frank Churchill to go and live with his aunt and uncle rather than stay with his father. So that way his father could do what he needed to do in order to support himself. And which, if you think about that time period, I would like to understand why Frank couldn't stay with his father, but that was just the way
I feel like that has a lot more to do with the Churchills than it does with anything else. I feel like they thought, and again, I don't actually know. There's no like indication of why, but like to me, I've always looked at it as Mrs. Churchill probably really didn't like Mr. Weston very much. And then her sister dies.
Yeah.
And she's like, you know what? Fine. Take in your kid, because that's the only piece of my sister I have left.
And could very well be the case.
And he's their heir, so my assumption is they don't have children of their own.
Yeah.
So, again, it's all whatever I feel in my head.
Yeah, and so whenever he became of age, he took on the Churchill name because up until whatever is becoming of age for that time, I'm going to guess like 18, he was Frank Weston. Mm-hmm. But out of respect for everything that his aunt and uncle did, he became Frank Churchill.
In chapter 3, we meet officially Mrs. Bates and Miss Bates, and then also Mrs. Goddard. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Bates and Miss Bates, they're probably, especially for some reason, Mrs. Bates, who does like nothing in the book, but in a lot of the adaptations, she always sort of becomes my favorite character because she feels sassy despite the fact that she does nothing.
Despite that she has no lines.
Yeah, despite the fact that she speaks no words in this entire thing.
Because she's supposedly deaf, so, you know, that would make sense as to why she's not saying a whole lot of things, but just because you're deaf doesn't mean you're mute. So
I honestly think she believes that Miss Bates will do enough talking for her that she doesn't have to say anything.
I think that is also
Miss Bates
true.
Loves to talk.
Yes, she is the local gossip, but at the same time, she is so kind-hearted. Like, she feels like an oxymoron.
Because it almost feels like she's like the local gossip, but she doesn't feel like a gossiper. Like, nothing she says is ever malicious. She's not a gossiper in the fact that she's like trying to spread news. She's a gossiper in that, you know, did you hear this? How exciting. It's going to be so great. Like, I'm so impressed. I love this. She's very much, I feel like she just, because of where they are in their life, because they're very poor, because of where they are, I feel like she's just happy to be included. And so in that, she must fill the silence.
Yeah.
With how happy she is to be included.
I think she feels very uncomfortable by the fact that people that were definitely their equals at one point in time in their life still choose to associate with them, but being very aware that they're not on the same level anymore socially.
Yeah.
And so I think she must be a nervous chatterer.
Yeah, I feel like she has to fill the silence.
Yeah.
I feel like silence makes her uncomfortable because of who she is and where she is in her life.
Yes.
But we also meet Mrs. Goddard, who is the mistress of a local boarding school. And Mrs. Goddard brings Harriet Smith, a girl whose parentage is unknown. That's exactly what it says. Mm-hmm. And Emma decides in that moment that she is going to be friends with Harriet. And she's going to improve Harriet by sort of detaching her from what Emma believes is the inferior acquaintance of the Martin family, who is a family of farmers. She wants to bring Harriet into higher society, which I'm like, it's a good idea, but in later we'll learn that it doesn't really matter. They still think about where you're from.
Yeah. Well, and something that I think is interesting, like part of the reason why Emma chooses to take on Harriet Smith as her like new companion is because Harriet is beautiful, is how she's described. Mm-hmm. And I always think it's interesting how each adaptation chooses to cast her.
Yeah.
Because it's very different ends of spectrums of beauty. And it's always interesting to see, because we also like it would be unheard of to hear, that Emma's not pretty. So, like you have to have a pretty main character. Your title character also needs to be attractive. And then you have this other character that like the book like doesn't give us a whole lot to go on, but it describes her as beautiful, and that's what catches Emma's attention.
Yeah, that is the important piece of information is that Emma believes that Harriet is beautiful and that they have to be friends because of it.
Right. Because it's not like most of the other quote important people that we meet, with the exception of like those that are higher and clearly married and off the market, Harriet's the only one that we don't have an idea as to how old she is.
I mean, I would assume young because she's at a boarding school.
I think because of where like the circumstances around her, it's at least assumed that she is younger than Emma, but like how young are we talking? Are we talking 16? Are we talking 18? Like,
yeah, there's no indication.
Yeah.
Which I think gives, and you'll see it in a lot of the adaptations, everybody sort of gets their own reference of like, how far are we going to go with this?
Right.
And I like Harriet. I think Harriet's fun. She's quiet, especially compared to somebody like Emma, who's very opinionated and very into making her opinion known.
Well, and I think some of that just comes from where Harriet is in life, where she understands that it is a huge deal that Emma Woodhouse is taking her in to become her companion. Like, she understands that that is a prestigious offer that she has been made. And she very much wants it to go well. So because of that, I think she's reserved herself a little bit more. But I get the sense with how, like, when Harriet does talk about the Martins, you can tell that she is comfortable with them because she spares no details when it comes to them.
Yeah.
And then she realizes, specifically when she's talking about it with Emma, she's like, well, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this because Emma seems to not be interested in this. And so she all of a sudden becomes very self-conscious about it. And I think it's just very telling of her like temperament and whatnot.
She's very much somebody who takes a lot of notice of the people around her and their emotions and their opinions and their thoughts, especially if it's an opinion of her or of somebody that she deems a friend or an acquaintance of a more
of
notable nature.
Yes.
Yeah. Because you learn a lot about the Martin family. A lot about Robert Martin, not Robert Smith, Robert Martin. And then at that point, Emma is very alarmed because it would be absolutely unacceptable if Harriet were to marry a farmer.
And I think it's because of how much Harriet pays attention to those kind of things. That's the reason why out of the single men that we meet, Robert Martin is the only one we have an exact age of, which is 24.
Because it's Harriet, not Emma.
And I think that even like speaks a little bit to whether Harriet realizes or not that she has interest in Robert Martin.
Yeah. I don't think she realizes it at the beginning.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's something that probably Mrs. Goddard doesn't encourage or really pay attention to, even though like she knows it's something that will have to happen at some point for Harriet. It's just kind of whatever.
But I think that's her not realizing that she has these feelings for Robert is why it's so sort of easy for Emma to persuade her of Mr. Elton's character.
Or lack thereof.
Oh, well, I mean, spoiler alert, Mr. Elton's not a great person. But yeah, I mean, because at that point, even Emma doesn't know that stuff. Right.
But even like when we hear about him, and I don't know how much of this, like as I was rereading it, is because I know what happens. Because it's been over a decade since I have read this, I don't remember how I felt about it when I read it, because I read it when I was like 14 or 15. Like, I want to say we get a little bit of a sense in just the way that like Knightley talks about it, like about Elton, that like he's a little bit of a shady dude. Even though he's a vicar, he's a shady dude.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that George doesn't call him George. That felt weird. You can definitely tell that Knightley. I don't like it. You can definitely tell that Knightley finds Elton to be a little, I think, pretentious and almost self-absorbed.
Oh, very.
Even despite the fact that he's a vicar.
It's one of the things that's so interesting about the character of Mr. Elton in general is the fact that he's meant to be this like religious, righteous man. And he's one of the worst characters in this book.
Truly. Oh. Don't get us started on Mrs. Elton. We'll get to that later. That's why they end
Bless
up
her.
together.
Bless her.
It's interesting too, Knightley's thoughts on Emma and Harriet's friendship. Because he and Mrs. Weston talk about it.
Yeah, they have a whole argument about the nature of the relationship and whether or not it's actually good for Emma, because Miss Weston thinks that it is, but Knightley is under the impression that it's honestly damaging to both sides.
Yeah, because he thinks that Harriet's sort of flattery of Emma is just going to reinforce Emma's sort of self-absorption and how her self-confidence, and it's going to injure Harriet in the long run, because she's going to become sort of uncomfortable with the people that she has to be around because of Emma. She's never going to fully belong, and Emma's never going to understand that Harriet will never fully belong, despite the fact that they're friends. And of course, Mrs. Weston believes that Emma's company is going to improve Harriet, and that, Emma needs Harriet. Which, like, I mean, I don't doubt that Emma needs a friend, but, like, poor Harriet.
I think because of the journey that Emma and Harriet go on together, they do improve each other in a way.
I think in the end, yeah, absolutely.
But it takes a while to get there.
Yeah, and I think that they do hurt each other in different ways, and then there's a lot of growth at the end of the book between them and in their friendship.
Yes. No, and because some of it is, in a way, exposing Emma's selfishness. Because we don't really know how long it's just been Emma and Mr. Woodhouse. I mean, yeah, Isabella and John have 4 kids. You don't know how old the oldest is, so you don't know when they actually like started having kids. So like we also have like no concept of like how long they've been married or anything like that. You also have no idea how much older Isabella is than Emma. So like there's just so many factors that can play into of like, well, how long has this been this way?
Yeah.
Because to an extent, besides the fact that we've already established Mr. Woodhouse is just a worrywart about everything, Emma's his baby.
Yeah.
And the youngest always brings out a certain side of parents.
As the youngest, I can attest.
Like it's not a bad thing, but there's a certain like level of protection that I think some parents want to provide their youngest, because they know that they can't necessarily do that for their older ones because they're more than likely already gone.
Yeah.
And so it's their like last chance at quote getting it right. Now, obviously, Mr. Woodhouse is not concerned about that.
No, he is not worried about that at all.
So he's at the other end of he is at the other end of the spectrum of just spoiling the heck out of her.
Yeah, which definitely does her no good.
No favors.
So I guess we officially meet Mr. Elton in chapter 6. I wrote that we meet Mr. Elton in chapter 6. So I'm going to assume that that's when it happens.
Probably.
That is when Emma paints a watercolor of Harriet. And Mr. Elton is just so impressed. He praises the portrait's likeness and all the things, and volunteers to take it to London to be framed, which, of course, for Emma means that he's in love with Harriet. Because the portrait is of Harriet.
I mean, and I can see where that is.
I can too.
I also don't necessarily see why he thought that was, because we learn later that he did all of this because he was actually interested in Emma, and I'm not sure I see that.
I don't really know what Mr. Elton's thought process was with the painting. I guess maybe in praising Emma's skill of painting, and he figured if I go get it framed, then she'll know that I really think her work is impressive because I'll be framing it. And I'm like, so this is kind of a long shot, sir. You're framing the portrait that is of Harriet, which again, to me, I think the same way as Emma, that I'd be like, oh, he really loves this portrait of Harriet because he loves Harriet. And like, that's obviously quite not true. Or he's just a psychopath. Either way.
All of the above.
All of the above for Mr. Elton. Mr. Elton is quite a character, and that's the nicest way possible to describe Mr. Elton.
Yeah. No, he's quite the character, and he makes quite the profession of love to Emma. It's always an interesting moment in any adaptation.
Oh, always. I'm always like, how are they going to do this? What are they going to do? How hard are they going to play into this?
And I feel like it's the common ground for every actor who plays Elton. They all tend to go about the same amount, like, of passion into it.
Yeah. It's always very, on my knees. I have loved you forever. Like very, almost a little too aggressive.
It's borderline Bridgerton, I burn for you.
Wow. She's made a Bridgerton reference. We were talking about Jane Austen. Wow. That's so impressive.
I was more so thinking of adaptations. And that was the clearest picture I could go with, as it's everywhere on social media right now.
And he just did that on SNL. He redid it for SNL, so that helps.
Yeah.
In chapter 7, I wrote Mr. Martin proposes.
Yes, and it's interesting how this goes about, because Harriet thinks it's a really good letter because Mr. Martin does it through a letter. He doesn't, do the whole get down on one knee and whatnot. Because
very on brand for the time period.
Very. He had gone by the school to hopefully talk with Harriet, but Harriet wasn't there at the time for who knows what reason. I don't think she was with Emma, but she could have been. I don't know.
I know she goes to Emma.
Yes, she takes the letter to Emma. So it could have been that she was just doing some things for the school, so she wasn't available when Robert Martin came by with his letter to propose. And Harriet thinks it's a really good letter. Obviously, she has nothing else to compare it to. Not that Emma has anything to compare it to either.
Right? Emma just thinks she is so worldly, and nobody has ever proposed to Emma.
No. And everything about that whole interaction, if anything, it shows how self-important Emma sees herself.
Mm-hmm.
Because Emma tries to not persuade Harriet to refuse him, but at the same time she does.
She pretends. Yeah, she pretends she's not going to persuade Harriet.
And then you still get the sense that Harriet's on the fence, even when it's as she's saying, oh, you just need to make sure that your emotions are clear. It sounds like she's going in a very, whichever way you choose, just, be clear about it.
Yeah.
But then she adds this little bit of, something about his pain that he's going through because she's telling him no. And it's I'm sorry. What?
It hasn't been decided yet.
You literally just said you were not going to persuade her one way or the other. She had to make this choice for herself. And then here you are telling her you have to say no.
Yeah. And then Harriet decides that she's going to say no. And Emma immediately is like, good job, because you know if you had accepted him, we wouldn't be able to be friends anymore. And I'm like, what is that? Like, she's so against the idea of being friends with a farmer's wife. And I'm like, why?
She's just against being friends with people who are of lower class. And I think part of that has to do with the Bates. Because, like, she knows the reason why it's important that they still associate with the Bates. The Bateses. The Bateses. But she doesn't, like, she finds Miss Bates to be incredibly annoying, which...
Oh, yeah, we learned that.
Any adaptation portrays how annoying this woman is. I can barely stand her, and I'm just having to watch.
Yeah, she's a lot.
She is quite the personality to handle. And so I think Emma has it in her head that all people of lower class are that way. And she doesn't want to handle more than what she has to.
Yeah. So in chapter 8, we have a lovely discussion between Knightley and Emma about Harriet and Mr. Martin, because Knightley tells Emma that Mr. Martin came to him about proposing to Harriet, and Mr. Knightley makes it very clear that he supported it in every way possible. This
is where we get to learn a little bit more about Martin, about Mr. Robert Martin's character, because Knightley says that he has never heard more sense, like more like sensible, like logic than from this man, who is, you know, like significantly younger than Knightley, but like he trusts this man's opinion. And the fact that like Mr. Martin came to him and said, this is what I want to do, and like literally showed him the plan that he had, because he proved that he could also afford the marriage, which was a big thing back then. I don't fully understand that would be quite the same thing that it is today, but like he still had to, you know, like prove that it wasn't going to be a problem, because I don't know that we've ever established that Mr. Martin is one of the tenants of Mr. Knightley. So he owns, like, he works part of the estate that Knightley owns.
Which also means that Harriet would be so close. Like, Emma's just so selfish. She's just so selfish. Yeah, and Knightley gets really angry because Emma tells him that the proposal has already been made and rejected. And she insists that Robert is not Harriet's equal. And Knightley's like, nobody knows who Harriet's parents are. In all actuality, Robert's actually a little superior to Harriet in the sense that, like, he has a family, he has a life, he has a job, he is the head of a household. Mm-hmm. And he, of course, knows Emma's part in the rejection and how much of it had to do with Emma.
He accuses her of writing her answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he accuses Emma of writing Harriet's answer when all Emma said was, I saw the answer. He's like, no, dude, you wrote it. Like, this has you written all over it.
It has you written all over it. Knightley has Emma's, like, he just knows her so well.
He does, but he's also known her whole life.
Yeah. Her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, they have, like, 18 years between the two of them. I just thought about that more than I needed to. Sorry. I'm back.
It's
right.
Okay. It hit me today as I was like, I was skimming through the book, and I don't know why it's like never registered in my brain that George Knightley is the older brother. Like, it's just never registered in my brain. I was like, wait a second. And I think part of the reason why it hasn't is because the first adaptation I ever saw was the Kate Beckinsale one, and John Knightley looks older. Like, the actor who plays John Knightley looks older than Mark Strong, who's playing George. But it's like, no, it makes sense. I mean, George Knightley is the one who's, like, inheriting the estate. So, like, logically, it makes sense. It just never registered in my brain.
It never hits you. And you're never looking at them and going, they're 18 years apart.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever watched an adaptation where I really had that realization.
Well, it's like I was looking at the age differences between actors, and I think the closest they ever got was the 2020, where there is
Oh, the newer one.
Yeah, because it's the actress who plays Emma was born in 96, and the actress who plays Knightley was born in like 82 or 83.
Oh wow!
So like
he does not look that old.
He does not.
Wow. Okay.
But like that's probably the closest they've gotten.
Yeah,
to, like,
that's probably
being
the closest.
On top of like the actual age difference.
Yeah. In that conversation with Knightley and Emma, again, Emma is, you know, Harriet's going to marry Mr. Elton. That is how that's going to work. And Knightley's like, Mr. Elton is only going to marry a woman with money.
Yeah.
End of story.
And part of that is because Knightley knows the conversations that happen when women are not present.
He gets to, it's so interesting too, because again, these books are typically from the perspective of the women. Mm-hmm. How much of the story we don't get because the women are not privy to the conversations of the men.
But this is where I think this also speaks to Knightley's character and the fact that he is upfront and honest with Emma of like, mm-hmm. You're an idiot if you think that Elton is going to go for this girl that we know nothing about. Like as far as her like family background and everything that she could come from. Like, could she potentially be from a family that has a lot of money? Yeah. Do we know that? No. So how are we going to treat her? Like she has no money. Like that was just the way that society worked back then. Which is
100%.
horrible, but at the same time, like it was what it was. And especially because of Mr. Elton's choice of profession, which I don't understand. If he was so concerned with money, why did he choose going into the church?
But I wonder if he had no other option.
That's probably what it was.
Again, we don't know that much about him, so like I've just always
I wonder if it was a Wickham, because let's be honest, Mr. Elton gives a lot of Mr. Wickham kind of vibes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if it was the choice between military or church. And in this case, this is the timeline where Wickham chose church.
Yes, this is in fact the moment where Wickham was like, nah, I don't want to get shot. Which makes sense. It's very on brand for Mr. Elton, who feels like, I feel like if he felt like he had to lift a finger, he'd be very upset.
Yes.
So, chapter 9, Elton brings back the picture. And he gives the girls a riddle. I only talk about this because it's so stupid. He gives the girls a riddle, and Emma and Harriet, mostly Emma, decode it to find that it is courtship, which Emma takes to mean that Mr. Elton is proposing courtship with Harriet.
Which he's not, but
what was happening. But that's okay. That's really all that happens in that chapter, but I can talk about it because it's so stupid.
Yeah.
Harriet and Elton sort of talk in chapter 10 because that's when they go visit the poor family near the vicarage. And Emma believes that Elton is being slow but not dissuaded towards Harriet, despite the fact that he gives her like zero attention the whole time.
It's really interesting how rose-colored glasses Emma looks at this relationship when it's really a lack of relationship between Harriet and Elton.
Yeah. So in chapter 11, we meet Mr. and Mrs. John Knightley and their children who come to Hartfield, I believe, for Christmas. Mm-hmm. I didn't write down if it was a holiday, but I believe it's for Christmas.
Yeah, it's for Christmas.
And in this chapter, we get sort of a look at Isabella's personality and how similar she is to Mr. Woodhouse. Because they spend time commiserating over the loss of Mrs. Weston.
But at the same time, and I think this is partially being colored by some of the adaptations, because adaptations take that in so many different ways. There are some where you have actresses playing Isabella being on that same level of worry. But then you have others that it's like, no, this is just how my dad is. If we just, we just appease him and go along with it, he'll be fine. We'll calm him down. It'll be great.
Yeah. And I love, you don't get a lot of look at John Knightley, but I love sort of how similar he is to his brother.
Yes.
They're both just not here for the BS. They're both like, nah, no. I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
I think John seems a little, oddly enough, more stern. I feel like George, I don't like calling him George, but like calling him Knightley when I'm talking about the other Knightley, it's very confusing. I feel like George is a little bit easier to laugh, whereas John feels a little bit more, and it could be because he's been married and he has 4 children.
There could be a level of
Knightley
cynicism with that, yeah.
Yeah, but it is interesting how similar they are when you meet them.
Yeah.
Mr. Knightley comes to dinner in chapter 12. It feels weird to call him Mr. Knightley when John is also there, but like I can't call him George because it feels weird. And he and Emma sort of agree to disagree about the Harriet situation, because at that point they were not being very friendly with each other. I don't think he'd come to the house, but his family was there, so he's gonna show up.
Yep.
And we learn, this is the first instance, I believe, really, where we learn of Jane Fairfax. Because Isabella asks about her. And Jane Fairfax is Mrs. Bates's niece.
Yes.
Mrs. Bates. That was a lot of S's. And Isabella actually thinks that Jane would be a great companion for Emma, who I'm sure we all know.
Aggravates Emma. Because
so
for
much.
whatever reason, Emma does not like this girl that she has spent little to no time with at this point in her life.
think it's just because Miss Bates talks about Jane so often and how great Jane is and how accomplished Jane is. And Emma, for like once in her life, feels inadequate. And she doesn't like feeling like that, so it makes her angry.
That is definitely one of the proposed options. But we don't necessarily know that for a fact.
Yeah, you don't actually know that.
But we don't actually meet Jane Fairfax until chapter 20. So we got a lot.
Yeah.
We got a lot of time before we actually meet
I'm
Jane
sure we'll
Fairfax.
get 4 or 5 or 20 more mentions of her the next time we see Mrs. Bates.
But like when we actually do meet Jane Fairfax in chapter 20, we get a rundown of like kind of what she's been doing. And like that she's a companion to somebody, but because the person that she's been companion to is about to get married, there's no longer a need for her to be companion anymore. And so now she's having to figure out kind of like what's next. And we know that Jane is the same age as Emma, so that's also probably a level of tension between the two. But then like in the next chapter after that, that's when we find out that Mr. Elton is going to be married to a Miss Hawkins. Miss Augusta Hawkins. There has never been a name ever in all of Austen's novels that's like, why does this woman need to exist? Let's give her a mouthful of a name.
And she, every adaptation plays her so well.
Yes.
They play her like exactly how I would describe her. Like
Yes.
always.
Yes. Very on point every time. And when Miss Augusta Elton, as she will be when we actually get to meet her like new like life mission is to have Jane Fairfax be placed into a good governess situation.
Yeah, very important
because
for her,
for whatever reason, it seems to be like out of the question for Jane to get married. Like to be able to potentially introduce her to somebody who she could actually, like
no
love.
No, not at all. Not allowed.
It's such a weird obsession.
Both of the Eltons are very strange. So
they are. That's why they are a match made in heaven.
Oh my god, a match made somewhere. Like heaven's the right choice.
I mean, he's a vicar, so heaven has to be the right choice.
Yes. Another new character that enters the world of Highbury is Frank Churchill. It's the name on everybody's lips, kids.
The
Frank
elusive
Churchill.
Frank Churchill.
Frank Churchill sort of enters the scene as elusive as his actual reputation.
Yes.
you get the sense, even chapters into Frank being there, that nobody has any idea truly who Frank Churchill is.
Do we even know that Frank knows who he is?
I don't think he does.
I don't think he does either. Or he
knows
himself so well that he can fool everybody else. That's literally like where that sits.
Yeah, because we do learn later, very much later, that Frank was playing a part. Was always playing a part.
And he uses Emma in that. Yeah.
And he plays that part very well, whereas Jane, who was also playing a part, does not play that part very well. One of them should be an actor, the other one should not. There have been some really great actors to play Frank Churchill, and I think that's because Frank is such a fun character to play, because you literally have no idea who he is.
Yes.
You just have to play this guy who is everybody's friend, but also nobody's friend. And the life of the party, but also not the life of the party.
Yeah.
So there have been some really great actors play Frank Churchill.
Oh, absolutely. And we will talk about him when we dive into these adaptations.
We're trying to get there. I swear.
But I mean, the whole like part that's being played is Jane and Frank secretly get engaged before either one of them return to Highbury.
Yeah, and they make the decision for some reason to pretend like they have only met each other very briefly.
But the reason for that is because they don't want word to get back to Frank's aunt, who literally holds his like wealth and any chance that he has at a good life in the balance. So because there's a fear that she will not approve. And so everything he's doing is to make sure that his aunt doesn't find out that he's, made life choices without her consent.
Yeah. I just think he takes it so far.
He does. Because
he spends a lot of time with Emma, obviously using Emma very badly, as Mr. Knightley will say at some point.
Yes.
And in that, he becomes sort of this gossip monger, specifically about Jane.
Which is, and probably like the best is not the right word to use, but it is the word we're going to go with. Example of him doing that is when they go to Box Hill. Which that one part, it makes me cringe in the book. It makes me cringe in every adaptation I ever see. I just
every time
can't
you watch
do
it. Oh,
in all honesty,
so cringy.
like I got through it. Like I get through it at least like the first time I watch an adaptation. But if I'm ever like rewatching it because I just feel like rewatching it, I always skip this part because it hurts so much to watch this happen. Because
the whole Box Hill thing,
it's such a breaking point for Jane specifically, and I can't help but feel for her.
The entirety of them going to Box Hill, just so many things happen that are cringy and upsetting, and it's hard to watch it, but you kind of can't look away, but like it's also really hard to watch it, because you get Box Hill is this big adventure that they get to go on. And Emma's so excited because Emma's not allowed to go anywhere because of her father. And she wouldn't really want to, also because of her father. She has fantasies, but like she knows where she is and who she is.
She knows what her responsibility is in life.
Yeah. So they get to go to Box Hill, and it's Emma and Frank and Mr. Knightley and Jane, Miss Bates. Mrs. Bates ain't going nowhere. And the Westons.
And the Eltons.
And I was blocking them out, I think. I was like, somebody else is there, but who is it? And the Eltons. And they have this picnic on Box Hill. It is too hot. It is too hot, which you know what that means. It means that tempers shall also be too hot.
Yes.
And so on this very hot day on Box Hill, you get just this very awkward and uncomfortable. Oh, and Harriet's there. I did not mention Harriet earlier, but she's also there. Sorry, I feel bad. I'm so sorry, Harriet.
Harriet just kind of goes wherever Emma goes.
I think I put her in Mrs. Weston's spot because Mrs. Weston is pregnant.
Yes, that is
true.
So
she doesn't go to Box Hill.
That is true.
That's what I did.
That's what it is.
And so they're having sort of this stilted picnic.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank, being who he is being very extra. He's being all over Emma in, you know, the ways that he could be all over Emma back then. And decides that they're going to play a game.
With Scrabble tiles, but they're not called Scrabble tiles. I think they just call them letters. But
I don't know
they're essentially Scrabble tiles.
Yeah. And in that, he really breaks Jane down by mentioning
Mr. Dixon.
Thank you. It went away. I was like, what's his name?
Which Mr. Dixon is I don't know if it's fiance or at that point husband of Miss Campbell.
The husband of Miss Campbell at that point.
Who was the person that Jane was companion to for so many years. Yeah. And so it's stirring the pot around this rumor that there was something between Jane and Mr. Dixon, and that Mr. Dixon actually loved Jane and not Miss Campbell, but, you know, whatever. I mean, the whole reason why Jane got sent back was because of whatever was going on between them, which is all false as far as we know. But it's the pot that is stirred. Yeah,
Frank is definitely a pot stirrer, because even at the picnic, he's, you know, we're going to play another game, and everybody must... What does it say?
It's like, Emma has told me that you all must tell her what you're thinking, which gets Miss Bates in trouble. But at the same time, like, Emma tries to backtrack a little bit because she can see that this is going to be a problem. But because she's not really sure what to do in the situation, she's not sure how to get out of it.
No, and she's very much in that situation because she essentially insults Miss Bates, essentially saying that nothing clever or smart or useful could ever come out of Miss Bates' mouth. Yep.
That's where we get, this is badly done indeed.
Oh, no.
From Mr. Knightley.
Oh, no. Oh, God, because Miss Bates is upset, but she's never going to show that she's upset, not fully, in front of these people. Because she feels like she's beneath them at this point. Jane's upset because of Frank being the way that he is, and now Emma's insulted her aunt. Harriet and I feel like Harriet and Mr. Weston and the Altons are just kind of like, this is very awkward and very not okay. So we're just gonna go on a walk. Frank is annoyed and hot, so he just up and leaves. Yep. And Mr. Knightley is so disappointed in Emma. I never want anybody to look at me the way that Mr. Knightley looks at Emma in the scenes. Anytime it's portrayed, I am always so uncomfortable because I feel so awful. But I know that Emma also deserves what she's getting.
Yes.
It's very upsetting.
Very.
And then, of course, Emma's like, oh my God, what have I done?
Yep. And I mean, she literally spends the rest of the book like trying to make up for it. And she does nice things for the Bates. She tries to make sure that she knows that like that they are important. They do have value. Despite what she said on Box Hill, like she does her best to make amends. And as she's like doing that, Knightley decides to go on a trip to see John and Isabella, but he doesn't know when he's going to come back. And he doesn't give any like reason for why. He just says, oh, you know, something that's been on his mind for a while. And it's during this time, it's just during this time that Emma realizes a few things about herself and her emotions and the way that she actually feels about certain people in her life.
Yeah, and the end of the book is very much a very nice, pretty arc of good things.
And the way, like, so when Knightley comes back, that's when we find out about Frank and Jane. And so, like, rightfully so, Knightley's concerned that Emma is hurt by this because it's perceived by everybody that Frank and Emma have an attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And Emma assures everyone, it's like, there was at the beginning, but then it reached a point where it's like, nah, I don't care.
Yeah, Emma's very, like, me about relationships. She's like, nah, I don't need it. Who's this guy? Oh, I'll take that one. I'm like, that's Emma. Emma's whole thought process on marriage is, nah, I'm good. Oh, wait.
And
I know you.
And so, like, Emma and Knightley have a whole conversation about it, like, because Knightley's mad at Frank for what he did because he treats so many people poorly throughout that entire situation, which I do not dispute. But at the same time, like, Emma calls him out a little bit on, like, it sounds like you were envious of him because while Frank treated everyone badly, everyone's ready to forgive him for who knows what reason. And Knightley's just like, well, yeah, I'd love it if people were that ready to forgive me if I ever messed up like that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't think that people would. And then that leads into him confessing his love for Emma, which was where we get the line of, if I loved you any less, I could talk about it more.
Love that line.
It's it's definitely up there in my, like, favorite ways that Austen has written these confessions of love.
Yeah. It's
very powerful.
I feel very... I'm going to say this. Let's see what happens. I'm going to say it. I think of all of the Austen men, Knightley is my favorite.
I think that's fair.
Because, I mean, I love Mr. Darcy. Like, you know, listen. Everybody loves Mr. Darcy. But I feel like Knightley, unlike Mr. Darcy, who you sort of see go through the motions of, like, trying to figure out his own life, I feel like Knightley knows who he is.
I think that's different.
He may not have originally realized he was in love with Emma, but I think all along he's been in love with Emma. And he's, you know, at the end of the book, he comes to the realization. But he has never changed who he is in any capacity, especially when it comes to Emma. So I think that's why Mr. Knightley is probably my favorite.
Well, and what the aspect that I really appreciate about Knightley is how he's not afraid to push. Like, he's genuinely trying to push Emma to be a better version of herself. He can see the potential that she has, and he's trying to help her realize it. Now, obviously, he's figured out by this point in the novel that he wants her to be better so that way they can become better as a couple. But I don't think that's always been his motivation.
Yeah.
But because of, I mean, he does that for, like, pretty much everybody around him in a way. He just wants those that he associates with to become better versions of themselves. And he knows when to not push, because obviously he's not pushing on Elton because he knows that Elton's not going to listen. Yeah.
He's a smart man.
Very smart.
So Mr. Knightley and Emma sort of profess their love for each other, which Emma is then... I feel like there's two things Emma worries about in this moment. The first one is that Harriet, very recently, has told Emma that she is in love with Mr. Knightley, or she believes she's in love with Mr. Knightley.
That's that statement, yeah.
And so Emma's like, oh no, can't hurt my friend's feelings.
Again.
And then also, yeah, after the whole Elton situation, Emma's like, oh no. And then also, Emma's like, we cannot be married. The way that they do this in several adaptations, one in particular, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the way they typically do this in adaptations always gets me, because she's like, we cannot be married because I cannot leave my father.
Yep.
Which then, of course, Knightley's like, okay, well, we'll just live at your house. What a thought.
No, and that's where you can see how much like Knightley has thought it through, because he knows that Emma won't leave her dad.
Yeah.
He knows that she feels the responsibility of taking care of him because Isabella has left. Like, she's in London. She's not nearby. She cannot help.
Who's going to take care of him?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, all works out fine. You know, Knightley's willing to live at Hartfield, and Harriet has decided to marry Robert. So
yes.
It's all good. It's all
yes.
great.
There's the book.
So let's talk about some adaptations. We're only going to really talk about, what is it, 3? I pulled my notes.
There's a couple of them that we're only really going to talk about.
We're going to mention 5.
Yeah. Well, there's technically 6 that exist. So the first adaptation that ever came into existence was a miniseries done by BBC in 1972. That is, like, while I have, like, it was written by Dennis. I have no idea how you say his last name. It starts with the letter C.
Dennis C.
I'm not even going to try. And there honestly, like, there are no actors in this that, like, are recognizable, at least to me. But I've never seen it. I don't know anything else other than what I have written down about it. So, and then we don't have another Emma adaptation until 1996, where we get 2.
My God, we got 2 of them.
One was written and directed by Douglas McGrath, and that's the one that stars Gwyneth Paltrow as Emma. I have never seen this one in its entirety. I tried to watch it recently, and I really just don't like Emma being played by Gwyneth Paltrow. So
yeah,
I don't go through it.
It was a life choice that they made for Gwyneth Paltrow to play Emma, and it was fine. The only saving grace of the 1996 Gwyneth Paltrow Emma is who plays Frank Churchill.
Ewan McGregor, which I didn't realize until I was looking through the cast list, because I've never watched it in its entirety. I'm like, okay,
and he also really doesn't look like himself in that movie. He's got like long, blonde, wavy hair.
I just feel like I need to find clips just so I can watch those specific moments.
Please do, because he's the only saving grace. He's the only saving grace of that entire movie.
Some other like notable actors that you have in that adaptation, you have Alan Cummings as Elton.
He's also great in that movie. But he gets... when he professes his love to Emma in the carriage and gets like on his knees in front of her. Oh, Alan Cummings, brilliant.
And then you have Toni Collette as Harriet.
And she's also fun. And I love Toni Collette. And she plays Harriet very well. She's very innocent and young and pretty.
Yes. So that's about the extent I think we have on that adaptation. The other 1996 adaptation was a TV movie, and it stars Kate Beckinsale as Emma. This is the adaptation that I saw first, and I like it. I don't think it's a horrible adaptation. It's not my favorite, but I like it. You have Kate Beckinsale as Emma. You have Mark Strong as Mr. Knightley. You have Samantha Bond from Downton Abbey as Mrs. Weston. You have Samantha Morton as Harriet, which I feel like I should recognize her from something else, but this is the only thing I can think of. And you have Dominic Rowan as Elton. And I think whenever I think of like this particular Elton, it's like, no, a delight. Like, he's trying to be overly positive about things when he thinks they're going to go his way. And then the moment they don't go his way, he sulks. It's, a legit 180.
Whatever it takes.
But needless to say, because this was like one of the first things I ever saw Mark Strong in. So when he was, I want to say he was the villain in Star Trek.
I think
that. So when I saw him as that, I was like, no, there's no way Mr. Knightley can be a villain like that, because that is like the one role that I associated with his.
But he is. Yeah. I sort of like watched it in the background. And I didn't hate it, but again, it sort of falls into that same Gwyneth Paltrow thing with me, where I'm just like, this is fine.
Which I think is so interesting that you have the it's all right vibes, because it was written by Andrew Davies,
Who's wonderful, but
who is like Jane
thing.
Austen king of adaptations.
Not with this one, apparently. This was not for him.
And then the next one that we have is honestly probably like my favorite one, which is the 2009 miniseries.
It's my favorite one too.
It was written by Sandy Welch. It has Romola.
I think Gare is how you say her last name, but I'm not 100% sure.
We'll go with that. She plays Emma. We have Johnny Lee Miller as Mr. Knightley.
He's my favorite Mr. Knightley.
I really need to take the time and actually like rank the Knightleys.
Yeah.
Because there are different ones. Like, I wouldn't say that Johnny Lee Miller is my favorite Knightley. He's not a bad Knightley, but I don't think he's my favorite. I just need to take some time to actually like think about it though.
Yeah, you let me know when you get there. Michael Gambon plays Mr. Woodhouse.
Dumbledore playing Mr. Woodhouse.
It's crazy, and he does it so well.
He does
so well. I love Tamsin Gregg, who plays Miss Bates. Fantastic.
And I think it's funny watching Blake Ritson play Mr. Elton, because just 2 years prior, he was Edmund Bertram in the adaptation of Mansfield Park with Billie Piper. And so obviously I saw him as Edmund Bertram first. So I honestly wasn't like, I was hesitant with when I first initially watched the 2009, because it's like, there's no way I'm not going to be able to see him as anything other than Edmund Bertram. So to go from like Austen hero to, for lack of a better term, Austen villain, like it was quite the shift, but it honestly, it worked very well.
And Christina Cole plays Mrs. Elton. I think what most people would know her from was she was in What a Girl Wants.
Okay.
She played who would be Amanda Bynes' stepsister had her father married that woman. But she's just fantastic as Mrs. Elton. The right shades of annoying.
Yes.
But it was 4 episodes, so they're roughly about an hour each. So it is the most in-depth Emma as well, being that it's very similar to the 1990s. Nope, not going to try to do it right now. It's very similar to when BBC did Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
I was going to try to do the year, and then my brain just stopped working, so I moved on.
And so the next adaptation that comes from that is a web series that was done in 2013 called Emma Approved. It's done by the same people who did the Lizzie Bennet Diaries minus Hank Green. And so you have Joanna Sotomara play Emma. They changed Knightley's name in this adaptation from George to Alex. Not quite sure why that was the choice that was made.
Because heaven forbid he be named George.
I guess because they weren't going to call him Knightley, which is, what he's generally called throughout the book. Because I guess it's weird for people to be called by their last names. I know plenty of people that are called by their last names. But anyways, that character
I went to school with people who were called by their last names.
Yeah. That character is played by Brent Bailey, which I really like him as Knightley. He definitely plays a very sweet Knightley. And then Harriet is played by Diane Hutton. And like, there are some characters that you don't get to see. Like, you don't ever get to see Mr. Woodhouse in this, like the worrywart that he plays, like that particular like thing that he does in the whole like book and most adaptations doesn't exist in this, because the way that Emma Approved is Emma is a lifestyle coach that specializes in matchmaking. And when we meet her, she has been 19 for 19 and the match of Annie Taylor and I can't think of the name that they give Mr. Weston as his first name, but the match between them is, as long as they get married, will be 20 for 20. And so she is very obsessed with having this like perfect record. And the vlog series starts because Emma's wanting to, quote, document her greatness, because she thinks that she'll be up for some sort of like lifetime achievement award for lifestyle coaching. And so that's like the whole premise of the adaptation. It's an enjoyable adaptation. It's definitely interesting. They have some crossover characters, so where they're like intermingling the world of Lizzie Bennet with Emma Approved. Instead of having an Augusta Elton, Caroline Lee takes that particular character's place. And it's such a choice, and it's not a bad choice. It's a great way to link the worlds together, because Caroline Lee has about the same kind of personality as Augusta Elton.
Very similar. Yeah, very similar.
So, it's something that they can definitely get away with. And it's definitely a choice that they make. And then you get to see Bobby Martin, or B Mart, as he likes to call himself. He's the IT guy that Harriet, who is Emma's assistant, kind of falls for, but in Emma fashion, tries to get in the way of that. So it's just a very interesting dynamic, and it's all interesting to watch it happen in vlog form, which you don't really go anywhere outside of their offices.
No, it's typically always in their offices.
Mm-hmm. But it's only like 72 episodes, and then they had like come back a couple years ago and did kind of like a follow-up thing. So you get to kind of see how Emma and Alex are doing as they've, professed their love and have, are trying to do the relationship thing. And in that little bit of comeback, we have Emma trying to help Mr. Collins reevaluate his life and trying to find his next life calling. And it's really funny. But it has nothing to do with the novel. So, it's all on its own.
Yeah. It's all its own thing. The next adaptation came out last year, 2020. It is the last movie I saw in theaters before everything shut down for the pandemic. It was directed by Autumn de Wilde, and the screenplay is by Eleanor Catton and obviously Jane Austen. It stars Anya Taylor-Joy as Emma Woodhouse, who is still really at this point sort of up and coming.
Mm-hmm.
This
I think
and
the Queen's Gambit have
really what made her.
Yeah.
It stars Bill Nighy as Mr. Woodhouse.
Good old Davy Jones.
Who doesn't love good old Davy Jones? It stars Johnny Flynn as Mr. Knightley, who is apparently a lot older than I thought he was.
Yeah.
Not that that's a bad thing, but...
No, he was born in the 80s, and you have Anya born in the 90s. So it's the closest we'll get to being the actual age gap that is between Emma and Knightley.
Mia Goth plays Harriet Smith.
Which I feel like I should recognize her from something else, but I don't.
I don't recognize her from anything else, but like that really means very little. Not a lot of big names in this movie, minus Bill Nighy.
You have Josh O'Connor as Elton, which he plays Prince Charles in The Crown.
Which I remember going to see this movie because literally I saw it when I was in Texas, and then when I got back from Texas, I was quarantined. So like, I don't remember going to see this movie, but I remember going to see this movie because it was such a weird time in my life. And then watching The Crown and seeing Josh O'Connor play.
It's
Prince
literally
Charles,
a stark difference.
But it's also a niche because Elton's kind of a bad guy, and at least in The Crown. Obviously, I don't know Prince Charles in real life, but in The Crown, they definitely don't portray Prince Charles as a very nice man. So,
no, but
it's kind of a niche. But the way they're played,
it's
is
that
very
level of
different.
awkward that exists in the way that only Elton can exist in the world of awkward.
Yeah.
Like, I remember seeing the trailer for this and recognizing Josh O'Connor. I'm like, no, they're literally putting Prince Charles as as Elton.
He was. It and this movie is so interesting cinematically because they really went all out on sort of making it look beautiful.
Yes.
It's very vibrant. It's very colorful, which is very much not of the time period.
Yeah.
And even I remember seeing the trailer for it and being like, is this actually an adaptation of Emma, or have they just turned it into their own thing?
It definitely
because
felt like
of the
an
way
absurdist.
that the trailer, like the way the trailer portrayed it. I was like, I don't feel like this is actually going to be an adaptation of Emma. And then watching it, I was like, oh, okay, it is. It's just, they've made Emma almost more mean in this adaptation. I feel like she comes off a lot more sarcastic and a lot more just done with everybody.
Yeah. No,
she
I'd
ain't
agree
got
with that.
time for your BS. Not that that's a bad thing. I think Anya Taylor-Joy did a very good job, and I enjoyed watching it, and I found it to be funny.
There were aspects I found funny, and then there are others I'm just like, what was that?
What happened?
The best example I have of my what was that was when Knightley is professing his love, Emma gets a bloody nose.
Yeah, it was, I mean, and I think, again, it was just, it almost cinematically feels like Autumn de Wilde has a very similar aesthetic to Baz Luhrmann. You knew I was going to say that, didn't you?
I was curious.
But it's the same thing. Baz Luhrmann's movies are always very bright and very vibrant and a little bit on the camp side and over the top and aggressive. Mm-hmm. And this, of all of the, Emma adaptations that are true to time period, because, there's also Clueless, but like true to time period and actually true to the story.
Yes.
They're all softer and definitely more of the BBC kind of adaptation. Whereas I just think it's definitely just a directorial choice of how do I want this to look. Mm-hmm. And I think Autumn de Wilde, who I don't know of anything else that I think that I've seen her direct. She just feels very camp. So
yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of it where at the end I felt like it was a little bit more of an absurdist take on, because there were certain things that just felt like it was blown a little bit more out of proportion, which for some things it worked and others it didn't. I would say that I really do like Johnny Flynn as Knightley. And
I thought
there's a scene that was added where you get to see him wrestle a little bit with his emotions, and it adds a level of vulnerability to Knightley, which I appreciate. I really appreciate getting to see that. So that's like one of the things I actually liked about it. Most of it I was just sitting there and like, I'm not exactly sure what I just watched.
It does feel a little silly. But I think in the end you still get the same story despite all of the extraness of it. I mean, the 2009 will always have my heart as being my favorite adaptation of Emma, because there is just something about, and it helps again that it's 4 episodes, and I love when we get episodic versions of Jane Austen, because her books are so just the worlds that she has created.
They're rich in content.
Yeah, she created a world inside of a world that had already existed. And yeah, everything's very full and rich and very content heavy. So it's nice to get to see more of what you get to read as somebody who has read Jane Austen. Obviously, for anybody who hasn't read Jane Austen, any of these adaptations will do, I guess.
It's kind of your personal preference. It's not it has to be this way.
No. And I mean, that's, again, any adaptation, that's just literature in general.
Yeah.
We did that.
And then we've slightly mentioned Clueless, which people tend to get on that, like going back to the whole, like, what's the actual relationship between Emma and Knightley?
Yeah. Well, that one's even more different because in Clueless, I watched Clueless the other day. Cher's father, Cher, who is Emma, Cher's father was married to, what's his name? Josh, who would be Mr. Knightley, Josh's mother. So they were technically step siblings at one point, but their parents were divorced. And I think they try to get away with that one but Cher says in the beginning of the movie, I only know this because I watched it literally 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Cher says in the beginning of the movie, Josh is not my brother. That one's, it's got Paul Rudd in it, so I'm fine with watching that one because I love baby Paul Rudd. I love adult Paul Rudd too. He's such a dork. But yeah, there's that one. The relationship in that one is almost a little bit more questionable that they would get together to me than the relationship in actual Emma.
But I feel like it's along similar lines of it.
Yeah.
Of it being that ambiguity of, well, they were this. Like, they were step siblings, but they're not presently step siblings. And then it's with the in-law thing, how does that work?
Yeah. This book is just very confusing.
So it's like, you have that ambiguity there. But
yeah. That's Emma. You're welcome.
Obviously, if you ever have anything that y'all like want to talk about with us, you can always reach us over on our Tumblr, because that's where we will do the conversating on the books and things. Yeah, the conversating. But yeah, so I guess thank yous are in order. As always, thank you to Jane Austen, because she is slightly the reason why we have this podcast.
Slightly. She's a lot. Her and William Shakespeare are the reasons we're here. Which is fun because the next episode is William Shakespeare. Big thank you to anybody who's ever done an adaptation of any form of Emma. Adapting something is not easy, and it's a lot of work, and not everybody's gonna love it, and that's life, right?
Yep. We don't like all of the adaptations that exist.
No, but people still put hard work into them, so thank you.
Yes.
And a big thank you to Zakaka, who is, still our favorite person.
Always.
On this podcast. Maybe minus Jane Austen. Sorry,
Maybe.
Zach.
It's hard to compete with the author that provides so much content for your podcast.
Right.
And as always, thank you to all of you who choose to listen to us. And, we would still probably be making this just because we have fun with this, but,
Yeah, honestly. Nobody could be here and we'd still be talking.
Having people to listen to it always makes it better, so thank you.
Yeah, hope you're enjoying it.
Yep. And as always, thanks for tuning in to League of Lit. If you have any suggestions for an episode, feel free to leave a comment on leagueoflit.tumblr.com.